a turning point in the history of our continent. That's how Chancellor Olaf Scholz described Russia's war against Ukraine. Speaking to a special session of Parliament, the German leader announced a raft of policy changes that would have been unthinkable just days ago. Germany will drastically strengthen its military and move quickly to eliminate its reliance on Russian energy exports. He put the blame squarely on Russian President Vladimir Putin, who he said had brought decades of peaceful coexistence to an end. The German Chancellor earlier today.
President Putin keeps talking about inviolable security, but what he's actually doing is using weapons to try to bring part of the continent under his power. And this will have an impact on the rest of Europe as well. Permanent security in Europe is not possible with Russia there. Putin is endangering this, and we need to not mince our words. We are tackling the challenge that these times have made of us with a cool head, resolutely. There are 5 approaches that we want to take. Firstly, we need to support Ukraine in its hour of desperate need. And in recent weeks and months, we have done this as much as we can. But with the attack on Ukraine, we find ourselves in a new age. In Kiev, in Kharkiv, Odessa, Mariupol, people are not just defending their homeland, they are fighting for liberty and democracy, for values that we share with them.
I'm joined now by our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane. Melinda, the Chancellor's speech today clearly signals a sea change in Germany's defense and foreign policy.
Absolutely, it does. As he put it, we are now in a different world than the one we knew before the 24th of February when this invasion began. And he made it very clear that as he sees it, and in fact, as all of the speakers we heard today in the Bundestag see it, we are at a moment in history when essentially the post-World War II era, as Germany knew it, or at least conceived it, has truly come to an end. War is possible again in Europe, the Chancellor said. And he also made it clear that this war, which he called Putin's war, it has implications that go to the entire security order of Europe and that go beyond this moment in time. And I have to tell you, I've been covering German politics for 30 years. And I've certainly heard other German politicians say that Germany's ready to step up to the plate. Germany's ready to take more responsibility. Appeals for Germany to work with Europe on a stronger, a common foreign and security policy. But I have never heard rigor, this rhetoric, this rigorous, this defiant, and certainly this concrete, with a commitment, as we just heard, for Germany to commit in this year alone 100 billion euros more to upgrading its defense capabilities, which badly need upgrading, and a clear statement from Chancellor Scholz for the first time that Germany will commit more than 2% of its GDP to defense spending. As you said, allies have been pushing that for years. Now, apparently, it's going to happen.
Well, you just said it. Allies have been pushing it for years, including the United States, very hard in the past 4 years. Did the government make this drastic change because it felt that public opinion may have changed and it would be squarely behind it?
Certainly, the Chancellor said, we are not doing this because the Allies put pressure on us. We are doing this because we must vigilantly defend our democracy in this new world that we now live in. And it's interesting that you mentioned public opinion, because it was very clear from the speeches of all 3 leaders that they know that this is a wrenching moment for citizens. The Chancellor talked about people sitting around their kitchen tables and asking, how can it be that we have war again in Europe? And I certainly, from the people that I'm talking to here in Germany, people shocked, dismayed, many of them out on the streets of Berlin today, but bringing them along on a commitment to defense spending is a difficult tightrope act for German policymakers because many Germans feel that the lesson they learned from World War II was that Germany must never again wield military might. Germany must always be on a diplomatic path, a path of dialogue. But military might, that was something that the Germans, that caused just terrible suffering all across Europe. So this is going to be a very difficult journey for many people, but I think I'm getting a sense many are ready to take it.
You know, and it was interesting because he made a reference that to hold on to that kind of thinking might, in fact, be naive given the circumstances Germany and Europe is facing today. Melinda Crane, thank you so much. Moscow's forces have met stiff resistance as they attempt to push further into Ukraine. The mayor of Kyiv says the capital is holding its defense lines and there are no Russian troops in the city. And after reports of heavy fighting in eastern Kharkiv, the regional governor says Ukrainian forces have retaken full control of the city. Russia's latest attacks have targeted civilian infrastructure and the military.
Chaos at an oil depot in Volodymyr, just outside of Kiev. Emergency services battled to the early morning after Russian rocket fire destroyed the facility. It's just one of the many targets of Russian fire overnight.
That night was hard. What did they do? This is revenge. The people rose to defend their state, and they, the Russian army, showed their real face. This is terror. They are going to bomb our Ukrainian cities even more. They are going to kill our children even more insidiously. This is evil.
Russia has confirmed it destroyed what it called 975 military targets in the campaign so far. But many of its rockets have landed in civilian areas, killing and maiming bystanders. The Kremlin also dispatched a delegation to Minsk, in neighboring Belarus, to open peace talks. But Ukrainian President Zelenskyy rejected the site due to Belarus's support of the Russian campaign.
That is why now we say not Minsk. Other cities may be the meeting venue. Of course, we want peace. We want an end to the war. Any other city suits us, as long as it is in a country from whose territory missiles do not attack us. Only in this way can negotiations be honest, and they can really end the war.
Here in Kiev, civilians continue to seek shelter in the city's subway stations. There's little hope, it seems, for a quick end to the fighting.
We'll cross now to DW correspondent Fanny Fashar, who's in Khmelnytsky in western Ukraine. Fanny, we've just heard that a Russian delegation has arrived in Belarus, supposedly to offer talks with Ukrainian officials. How is this going down in Ukraine, and what's the government's response?
It's not going down as an offer or even as a genuine offer, but rather as a call to surrender. President Zelenskyy accuses Belarus of basically being complicit, helping Russian forces to invade Ukraine from the northern border. And also, just shortly after this so-called offer was made by Russia, the president of Belarus pointed out, if Zelenskyy doesn't appear at that negotiation table, then this country is going to lose its status. So an offer even combined with the threat there. Clearly not negotiation is all about. If you enter one, actually the ending or the conclusion of that is quite open. So as a result, President Zelenskyy decided to reject that offer, but at the same time also made clear that this country is very much open to negotiation, but simply not in Belarus. In fact, a few days ago, he offered, let's meet and sit down in Poland, in Warsaw. No comment there, no reaction there from Russia. There is a huge concern here in Ukraine, though, that this may be, of course, understood by Russia, this rejection. All right, then we are just going to keep bombing your country even more. So people are really worried what's going to happen next in Ukraine.
Let's talk about what's happening actually on the ground at this point. It looks very calm where you are. How are things generally looking today where you are? And what have you been hearing about other parts of the country?
It may look calm, but actually it's not. A lot of internally displaced people arrive here in Khmelnytsky, which is one of the biggest towns in western Ukraine. At the same time, people who live here are getting ready to leave or arm themselves and help the Ukrainian troops. Now, there was a much more critical situation, though, compared to what's happening here in the capital city in Kyiv. Overnight, there was shelling, critical infrastructure, gas and oil oil facilities were hit. Also, in the northeastern part of Kyiv, battles between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces that were dressed in a saboteur manner. So basically, apparently they had Ukrainian military clothes on, and that street fight is actually the main concern in Kyiv right now, as people are under curfew, but some, despite the curfew, are still trying to make it out of Kyiv, trying to leave, bring their families to safety. So a lot of chaos there, and very important to point out, there is a massive fighting going on right now in Kharkiv, also in the eastern part of Ukraine. So a lot of people are on the edge in Ukraine as shelling, as airstrikes, military airstrikes continue to hit Ukraine.
Our correspondent there, Feni Fachar, reporting from western Ukraine. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has sent tens of thousands of people fleeing their homes since Thursday. Huge crowds have been waiting at train stations to travel to the border and cross into neighboring countries. These scenes from Lviv in western Ukraine show the fear and frustration. There's not enough space on the trains to carry everyone to safety. Men are forced to say goodbye to their families as they are not allowed to leave because they've been called up to fight. Many of the refugees are headed to Poland. Our reporter, Monika Szydłacka, now with this report.
The Polish-Ukrainian border in Medyka in southeastern Poland. Since Russian forces invaded Ukraine, around 100,000 people have crossed the border seeking refuge. They say there are long lines of cars trying to enter Poland. Many of the new arrivals are met by friends and relatives on the Polish side, including Oksana Dubovenko. She and her family have a grueling 30-hour journey behind them.
We live near a military airport. In the morning, we heard sirens. My mother immediately hid in a bomb shelter. My parents stayed in Ukraine. And my brother, too. He's serving in the army. I know they were able to leave the bomb shelter, but you never know if maybe they'll have to hide again today. I'm really worried.
Anya also had to leave her loved ones behind. Her mother is not allowed to leave Ukraine because she works for the military. The 17-year-old is still in shock.
I was afraid that people would trample me trying to cross the border. But now I believe that things will go well. But I fear for my family and for Ukraine. I don't know what will happen, and I'm afraid.
Many volunteers are helping the exhausted refugees on the Polish side of the border. They can get a warm meal here. And Poland's border guards say they're ready to meet this unprecedented challenge.
In our history of Polish border guards is a first situation in this scale. We brought more and more staff. All the cabins which can be open at the border crossing points are open. What we did today in the morning, even we checked the pedestrians on the terminal dedicated normally for cars.
The family finally reunites at a parking lot in Medyka. Oksana's husband, Sergei, has come from Düsseldorf, where he lives and works. The Russians are making war, shooting, bombing, and launching missiles. There were explosions in the town where my daughter lives. We have to get them all out of there. We have no choice. Now Sergei will take his family back to his home in Germany, but it's unclear what they'll do and how long they can stay. His family never wanted to leave their homeland.
Ukraine is doing its best to repel the Russian attack by training civilians to fight. Support from the U.S. and other NATO members has also bolstered national defenses. But few believe Ukraine is a match for its much larger neighbor. Taking active and reserve troops together, Kyiv can draw on more than 1 million men and women. Russia has more than 3 million. Ukraine has less than 2,500 tanks compared to Russia's 13,000. And in the air, Ukraine has just 67 attack aircraft in contrast to Russia's 1,500. I'm joined now by historian and retired General Klaus Wittmann. Is the attack, General, going the way Vladimir Putin envisioned for the Russian forces?
I don't think so. Of course, with overwhelming high-tech weapons, artillery, rockets, cruise missiles, the Russians have destroyed military installations of Ukraine. That is according to the book. That cannot be prevented, and they have the air superiority after this so-called fire preparation. But to think that then the land troops can go through Ukraine without risk like the knife through butter was an illusion. There is the brave Ukrainian people, 200,000 soldiers, up to 900,000 reservists, the National Guard, armed civilians, and a determined, brave president leading proudly and competently. In this scenario, anti-tank and air defense weapons are of the essence, and I, as a German, are very satisfied that our federal government has revised its arms delivery policy at last yesterday.
Something that will be desperately needed for the Ukrainian forces. Most of us have been seeing images of regular men and women, I should add, from the streets picking up guns in order to fight to defend Ukraine. I want to ask you this. We just showed our viewers the great difference between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. How long can the Ukrainians defend themselves against Russia's clear military superiority?
I cannot tell. The out-of-control, obsessed dictator appears to be capable of everything. And I have before my inner eye the pictures of Grozny in the Chechen War, where the whole city looked like yesterday in Kiev, the multi-story building. But I know one thing. Russia will face would face in any case, even if it occupied the whole of Kiev, would face a long, protracted underground war, and one cannot put 44 million people in jail or in the gulag. Putin has miscalculated, but also with regard to the popularity in Russia of this war. And I am not sure how many fallen Russian soldiers he will be able to take.
You make reference to this long, protracted, essentially guerrilla war. Do you think that it's a war that could extend as long as, say, Russia's infamous war in Afghanistan?
I do not know. I do not know. I'm not a prophet. It will be an underground war. It will be before house-to-house warfare comes, it will be street-to-street warfare, where you do not know where a sniper sits, from which side street an anti-tank weapon will fire. A very demanding task with much bloodshed on both sides, and probably much higher motivation on the side of the defenders. The Chechen War was almost the annihilation of the cities. And I think before it came to that, Putin would have to stop because of his internal opposition, and also because the clique around him will start to be fed up with Vladimir Vladimirovich. And I think the attack on Ukraine is the beginning of the end of Putin's rule, quite frankly.
I think we will leave it right there. Klaus Wittmann, historian and retired general, many thanks for your time and perspective.
Thank you.
In Berlin, a demonstration calling for restoring peace in Ukraine is underway, with estimates of 20,000 or more people taking part in the protest. The demonstration is organized by a variety of groups, including workers' unions, religious groups, and environmental organizations. Protesters are calling on Russia to immediately withdraw from Ukraine and to respect democracy and human rights. In the past days, there have been numerous demonstrations across the world in support of Ukraine and demanding an immediate end to all-out violence. Our political correspondent, Thomas Sparrow, is covering the story for us here in Berlin, where the demonstration is taking place. Hello, Thomas. How many people are there, and what is the atmosphere like?
This is certainly full here in central Berlin between two of the city's emblems, the Victory Column and the Brandenburg Gate that you can see behind me. Some of the estimates have pointed that between 20,000 and 30,000 people were going to gather here in Berlin today. I can clearly say that this is a very big protest. It's also an intergenerational protest. I was speaking, for example, to a grandmother of 6 who was concerned about this war. I was also talking to families with young children who had brought their own posters, specifically asking politicians to also consider the fate of children in this war. And I can also say that this is a very international protest. I was talking to people in English and in Spanish. I've seen people with Estonian flags, a group of Estonians, a group of Polish people as well. I've also seen, and I spoke to a family from Bolivia. So you can clearly see from this place here, from the center of Berlin, that it is clear that this conflict has long ceased to be a conflict only between Russia and Ukraine. It is an international conflict, and what people here are asking for is for this international conflict to cease.
You've been talking to people there, I gather, Thomas, and I don't know to what extent you can get into the specific issues, but I'm curious about whether they're supporting arms deliveries to the Ukrainian forces and the exclusion of Russian banks from the SWIFT transactional system.
So this is the biggest protest so far here in Berlin, but it's not the first one. So I was covering a few of the protests that happened in the last few days and the demands that you have just mentioned. So this very important change in German policy to send weapons to Ukraine or to support a ban on Russia from the SWIFT system is certainly something that people here support. They're all obviously against war. They also want Putin to stop his actions, and they're asking for the international community, for the West, but also in particular for Germany, to increase its pressure on Russia, to increase its pressure on Putin to stop this war. This is certainly something that we've been hearing from people here, and this is also, by the way, something that we heard from people in the last few days when I was covering some of these protests that were happening here in Berlin.
Thomas Sparrow, in the middle of an event, the likes of which we're seeing all around the world. Thank you.